Welcome to the Secure the Perimeter podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Secure the Perimeter podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about all things security, both for your personal physical security, for your security for your family, security also for the perimeter of your finances and your business, and really all aspects of life. And if you have listened to any of our other podcasts, you'll know we're talking right now with Brent Camfield, just talking about his story and why he cares about securing the perimeter. So, Brent, we're just going to get back into it.
Yeah, man.
Just back into your time in the Marines. Right before we started recording, you said, let's just get through your time in the Marines, and then hopefully next week we'll get into kind of what you're doing now and why you're so passionate about securing the perimeter. So let's get into it. I think last week we left off, you were headed to your first combat deployment, your first combat deployment right after 9/11. So yeah, let's just kind of pick up there and let's get going. So
yeah.
You said you headed overseas, your first combat. What was that like? What are some of the things that you right off the bat are trying to learn, trying to pick up from the guys who maybe have more experience, or what are you trying to impart to the guys who are under you?
Yeah, I think, at that point, as I had shared in the last podcast, we were trained, we were ready. We weren't trying to learn at that point. We were more trying to rehearse. Rehearsals are, critical, when it comes to deploying and going overseas to fight. So for us, it was rehearsal after rehearsal after rehearsal. So we were building up the Marines' muscle memory, on the weapons, the tactics, and the employment. So, of their weapons. And so for me, I was, at that point, I was in a communications unit, but I got pulled because of some competitions that we participated in at 1st Marine Division. Division schools hosted a competition every year, and we participated in this competition. It was a crew serve weapons competition, which was, pretty arduous, pretty rigorous.
Right.
And we trained very hard for that. The result of that was our teams took first place in all of the infantry and non-infantry division competitions. So when Iraq happened, I got pulled to become a combat team platoon sergeant for security teams because we were running foot mobile patrols, convoy security. Basically, anytime the regimental combat team commanders moved or their elements moved, we had teams moving with them. So it was pretty cool. And again, we were already trained. We just continued to do rehearsals until the punch.
What is that like, getting geared up and headed over? What was like once you're on the ground over there, and just all of that kind of stuff?
Oh, you were living on pure adrenaline. I remember I remember hitting the ground. While we were in Kuwait, we were rehearsing. We landed in. Obviously we flew through Frankfurt, Germany, from Bangor, Maine. Well, from Camp Pendleton to Bangor, Maine to Frankfurt, Germany, and then straight into Kuwait City, and then from Kuwait, we were there maybe not quite 2 weeks when we punched. So when we punched, we were living on solid adrenaline, and I remember I didn't sleep for the first 3 days, several days, and it got to the point where the first sergeant basically ordered me to go get some rest because, he knew that without rest, I was going to be no good.
Right.
I was going to fade out. But But for me, I was literally living on solid adrenaline.
And so you didn't sleep just because of all the adrenaline.
Adrenaline, responsibility of making sure my teams were good. Everybody had plenty of supplies, ammunition, chow, water, that kind of stuff, which we quickly ran out if you followed the activities of that whole escapade.
Yeah, I didn't pay much attention to like the beginning of the war. Actually, by the time I really started paying attention, is when we were withdrawing from Afghanistan. So
Several years later,
quite a few years later. So I was pretty young at the time, but yeah, I also love listening to. I've loved listening to and really enjoyed listening to a lot of people recounting their stories, because I think it's really important to learn from history, so that the idea is learn from history so we're not bound to repeat it.
Yeah.
So I love hearing from guys who have served and learning from lessons learned in war and in military. It's kind of almost like a pressure cooker of life, so you're going to have regular life things happen in a ramped up levels, and so sometimes they're easier to see. Like when I'm editing a podcast, sometimes I'll take the audio and I'll turn it way up, because then all the imperfections are going to be really noticeable and a lot easier to hear, and then I'll bring it back down to the level that I actually want it to be at. And so I think of like the war is the same way. You just take leadership problems, you take logistic, you take all of those interpersonal relationships, situation stuff, and you just like turn in the volume way up, and then it makes it really easy to see. Oh, look at that. Well, that didn't work out good. That wasn't helpful, or that didn't move us in the direction we wanted to go. And then you take that and you apply it actually to your own life, where you want it.
Yeah, and I think life's about lessons, man. Whether we're talking about, how the Word of God applies, to our lives, we talk about, I come at it from a different angle, because I'm not living just a regular life at this point. I'm living a pretty extreme life. Marine Corps is pretty highly aggressive, if you will.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of experiences in Iraq that I take with me now and I carry with me forever, because those were all life-changing moments. For instance, we were on a convoy and we pushed for 17 solid hours on a convoy. We were moving from Baghdad, and our goal was to get into Baghdad. Moving from Kuwait, our goal was to get into Baghdad and secure the country. And so there's a lot of rhetoric about the Marines, and how people perceive Marines, and all the way from World War II through the Vietnam era into modern day warfare. But the Marines have always had the ability to be moved by the president's order. Mm-hmm. It doesn't require congressional support to get the Marines to go somewhere. It's literally just an occupational force. That's even more than an occupational force, but a force, right? That's at the disposal of the president. The president can decide to go somewhere, and he sends Marines. But let's not forget about Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Green Berets. Those are all spec ops teams that also move and operate independently, right? And those operators of different military organizations, such as the Army and the Navy, are really kind of in concert with the Marine Corps, because those dudes do things like Marines do, as well as Marine Recon. But the Green Berets and Navy SEALs do things in the middle of the night that no one knows about. By the time you're waking up the next morning and drinking your first cup of coffee from your office building in New York, mayhem has happened, and the target has been neutralized, if you will. So, but these activities, these events in Iraq, one of my first I guess, situations was when we were moving through, we had been on a convoy for north of 17 hours straight, and it was just dust and just going at the highest speed, staying tight with the vehicle in front of you, making sure the vehicle behind you stay close to you. And I remember there was a sudden stop because someone detected, we'll just say, enemy activity. And by the time I was actually the driver of this vehicle, because we had limited drivers, and so I was driving this particular vehicle. I'm the platoon sergeant, but by the time I'd noticed the vehicle in front of me was stopped, as I busted through the dust cloud, I'd already,
Man.
we smashed into this van, and it was bad. It was a bad wreck. I remember my, left arm kind of going through the windshield, part of my head and my face. And we're in a communications vehicle. Well, when you're in a communications vehicle, you're not allowed to leave that vehicle in the middle of nowhere. You're not allowed to leave the vehicle. You're not allowed to abandon it because you don't want that communications vehicle to get in the hands of the enemy. And so I made the command decision to move my team on the convoy coming through to get them out of there. And then I stayed behind with another NCO that was a dude that was from a reserve unit. And, it was a pretty surreal moment because I'm bleeding like a stuck pig in the middle of the desert. There's nothing around us but a horizon of sand, and it's just me and this other sergeant. And I remember him looking back at me, and he's like, dude, what are we going to do, man? I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, we've got limited ammo right now. We hadn't even had our full combat load yet.
Oh, wow.
And so we had about 200 rounds between us. And at the sustained rate of fire, you're going to last about a minute in a firefight. And I just remember looking at him, and I'm like, just take well-aimed shots, dude. And I think at that moment, it was a moment of clarity for sure, because that's when your whole life catches up to you and you realize, that very moment could be your fate. If fate had changed the direction of winds, or if we had been compromised. So I remember that was one of the first incidents. We had many more incidents after that, obviously, before we even got to Baghdad. But that was a very surreal moment for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right now, I know that your faith is a huge part of your life and really important to you. As you're deploying, as you're doing all of this, how is your relationship with God? What does that look like? Even through, if you even want to back up just briefly through like boot camp and training, like where was your faith in all of that, growing or not growing, existing, not existing? How was that?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, man. I think, as a kid, my dad was not a churchgoer, but my dad also supported us. And if we wanted to go to church, he never, like my dad was like, look, if you want to go to church, I would, I support that. You go to church, right? And I think as a kid, by not going to church, it made me more curious. And I'm just being honest. I think because my dad, when he grew up, he was forced to go to church all the time, right? And so he was kind of burned out. And I don't get into the whole religion thing because religion is it's a deep subject for me. But I think it burned him out, and so he didn't like to go to church a lot because of the things he saw in church and saw in religion. But he supported us. So fast forward now to the Marine Corps. I always had a relationship with God. I always had a relationship with Christ. But I think up to that point, it was, there was a period in throughout my career when I got very close to God through some things that I was going through in my career in the Marine Corps. And so by the time we got to Iraq, I developed a very close relationship with God. And it's the first time I felt the Spirit of God move, inside of me. And to people, some people, it's hard for them to understand.
Yeah.
But I remember an incident in Baghdad. We get into Baghdad. I'm fast forwarding quite a bit, but I remember there being a female Marine, that was assigned to my unit by a gunnery sergeant. And, when we're in Iraq, by this point, we're in the towers. We're in Baghdad City. And so we occupied, watchtowers, basically. We'd secured the city by this point, and we're kind of just, on high alert because obviously the enemy's out there. The enemy wants a piece of us, because we took over. And so I remember looking down, and my assistant squad leader, Sergeant Hedger, was like, "Hey, man, what's this?" And so we look out, and there's this female Marine dragging a sea bag up to one of my towers. And she comes up, and she's like, "Hey, Sergeant, I'm told to report to you. I'm going to be assigned to you now." And I'm like, "No, you're not. Take your sea bag and go back to where you came from." And the look on her face, she's like, "What?" She goes back. Hour later, here she comes again. And she's like, "Gunny said, I'm assigned to your unit, and if you have any issues with it, go see him." Roger that. So I grab my weapon, grab my pistol, grab my flak and Kevlar, and head out. Gunny basically pulled rank. And he's like, "Look, this female's going to be on your team." And I'm like, "Gunny, I don't want this female on my team." And he's like, "Well, look, she's going through some stuff. Long story short, he basically pulled rank on me, so she had to be on my teams." So, and there's a lot of context in this, but I remember I put her on the graveyard shift with me because as a leader, I always tried to lead by example. So I put myself on the graveyard shift, which the graveyard shift is from 02 to 06. That's when you expect things to happen. So I was always on that shift. So I had a 4-hour watch, and so I put her on my watch. And I remember being in the tower, and this moment was so clear. I remember her asking me, it's probably 03 in the morning, and she's like, "Sergeant, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah, shoot." And she's like, "Do you not like females?" And, of course, when you're, as a Marine, you're not obligated to explain yourself to subordinate Marines. But, I felt obligated to kind of explain to her my mindset and why I thought the way I did. And I said, "Sure, I love females." And I said, "Are you asking me because of, the fact that I didn't want you on our teams?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, And so I broke it down, and I said, "Listen, here's the deal. America is a sovereign nation, and we don't believe in putting women and children on the front lines. We believe in protecting women and children. And it's because of my love for women and children as to why I didn't want you on these combat teams. Because men are, the hunter-gatherers, and men are the defenders, and men are the fighters. And it's our duty and obligation to secure our freedom and to keep the fight, out of America." And, when I explained it to her that way, that it was because of my love for women and children as to why I didn't want her on our team, that I didn't want her experiencing the same things we did firsthand. Obviously she's a Marine, she's in combat, she's going to see stuff, but I didn't want her experiencing it firsthand.
Right.
I remember looking over, and this girl was bawling, just sobbing. And she said, "I really apologize." She said, "I had you figured for someone else." And that moment, I kind of shared my faith with her, which, when you're in combat, you kind of make your feelings obscure. You don't break those out. You don't expose your feelings because emotions have no place on the battlefield. But I shared with her my faith. That was an opportunity to share my faith with her because of my love for women and children. That's sacred, right? We're a sovereign nation, and so we don't believe in sending our women and children onto the battlefield like third world nations do. They literally will put bombs on babies. They did it in Vietnam. They do it now. Extreme terrorist organizations, Hamas and other organizations like them. And so, when I broke it down to her and I exposed my faith, she understood, and she was more inquisitive and more curious about my faith because it illuminated a different side of me to her, from this hardcore driven Marine to a person with compassion and a love for Christ. And so I just shared my faith with her in the tower in Baghdad, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of times maybe you wouldn't expect to have an opportunity to share your faith. Out of all the places that you think, oh, you know what, I'll probably have an opportunity to share my faith. Maybe a tower in Baghdad wasn't exactly what you were expecting. But I've also found that whenever I'm sharing my values, I find that people find it very interesting and surprising often of like,
Yeah.
why are you this way? Why do you act this way so different? And it can just open all kinds of doors for talking about your faith and why you have the hope or the joy or the peace. You know, the Bible talks about the peace that passes all understanding. It really is a peace that people don't understand, and that can give opportunities to talk about your faith for sure.
You know, I remember her asking me at that point, Carl, she's like, you know, Sergeant, it's crazy because I never thought that you were that way. And for me, it was a double-edged sword because I'm thinking to myself, how could you not see Christ in me? I'm not carrying myself in a way that people see Christ illuminated in me. And I think that, you know, and now much further down the road, I try to do that. But she said, you know, she basically asked me the question, like Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians, and she said, you know, how could you have faith in a time like this? The things that we're seeing, you know, the poverty and the combat and the extreme conditions. And my response to her was, how could you not? You know, you have all these evil things in the world and these evil people that you don't think exist until you see it firsthand. The weapons of mass destruction that they said weren't there, they were there. We have 900 pictures of semis with missiles in the launch position. You know, this dude was going to implode Baghdad once we got there. But we moved so hard and fast that he wasn't able to do it. And I just told her, I said, look, in a time like this, it should illuminate our faith. It should illuminate Christ. Because Christ is necessary, especially over here. Christ is necessary in the darkest corners of the earth. You know, it's good, you know, to believe in Jesus when, you know, the sun's shining and you're, you know, in suburbia America and you've got a latte in your hand. But the real times of faith are tested and tried in the darkest corners of the earth. And that's where Christ is needed. And I think he said that, you know, when he sat at the tables and the Pharisees were asking him, why are you sitting with these people? These are tax collectors. These are sinners. Yeah. And Christ said, this is why I'm here.
Yeah, right? I'm here for the sick. The ones who are not sick don't need a doctor.
That's right.
But I'm here
don't need a physician, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's just awesome to hear about your firsthand experience with taking your faith, not only just like you're saying here in America where it's getting harder, but it's still very comfortable as believers.
Sure.
And then being able to take that to where it's dark and being able to see. I haven't ever experienced really seeing evil in a pure form. I should say in an obvious form. I think in America we do have forms of pure evil, but they like to hide. They like to disguise themselves as political agendas and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But when you go over and it's just open, you know, that can really change your perspective.
Well, it's crazy too, man, because, you know, in Iraq, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in different other parts of the earth, these people are raised to hate Americans, you know, and their mission is to execute an American, and that gets them higher, right? You know, in their paradise, they call. And for us, it's about serving other people, you know, and we were there to liberate and free the Iraqi people, the Afghanistani people. And for me, you know, people try to separate manhood from, you know, being compassionate and loving. And to me, it's the same thing, right? You can be a hardcore, you know, driven individual. Here I am, this hardcore Marine, but you can also be compassionate at the same time. It's one of the same, right, to me. And so my duty is to serve as a Marine, get my Marines through, combat safely, get them home, alive. That was my mission. But at the same time, I was also there to serve and be, Christ-like and serve with compassion. And that was an opportunity that I was given, and I believe that was a very divine moment. I think it was an epiphany that God placed before me, because I had the opportunity to share my faith, and I did.
Yeah.
And here she construed me as this hardcore driven Marine, did everything by the book. I had a perfect record. I was meritoriously promoted, all this stuff. But I was able to illuminate my faith.
Did it feel convicting in any way, where you were like, how did you not know I was a believer at that point, where you're moving forward? And now I know, because now I know the way you live your life is so openly, I'm a Christian, and you work really, I see you putting in lots of effort to make sure that your life reflects, and that anybody who's around you for any amount of time is going to say, there's something different about Brent. But at that time, did it kind of feel...
That was definitely a pivotal moment for me. Like, man, I think I should, be a little more illuminated, or a little more subjective to my faith, and people should see Christ in me, right? And even in my unit, I train Marines. I was brought into this new unit, and it was a unit that needed some help. They had substandard leadership. And so I was brought in as a platoon sergeant to kind of turn this platoon around, and I did. I remember praying with some Marines out in the hallway, of our facility that we operated out of, and some of the Marines had asked me the same thing. They're like, wow, you're kind of different. You're not the same as the NCOs or the leaders that we're used to serving under. And I always had the motto that you lead from the front. Right, and you don't lead behind a placard or a title. I can't stand people who hide behind a placard or a title. It's like, get out in front of your placard and be a leader. Right, Jocko Willink says it a lot. The epitome of being a leader. My philosophy is get in the trench with your Marines. It's the same in life. Get in the trench with your family. Get in the trench with your friends. Don't stand up there and just shout orders. Get down in the trench with them and show them that you're one of them. And so leading from the front is there's a lot to that for me, being a leader. I try to lead from the front, and I don't like titles. I get the question a lot, are you the CEO of your company? And I always tell people, no, I'm the janitor.
Yeah.
And to them it's kind of humorous, but to me it's not really, because I am the janitor. I am the culture curator. I am the CFO. I am the CEO. I'm the technician. I'm the whoever I need to be, right, for my team. And so, but to me, that's part of manhood, right? A lot of dudes are too proud to expose their faith. And to me, that's part of being a man.
Yeah.
It's like, out with it, dude. Don't hide Christ. Don't hide your faith from people. Illuminate it. Who cares what people think? Because this life it's critical, and if we're to follow the Word of God, we're just passing through this place, man. This is not our final destination. And so for me, I take that literal. I believe in Christ. And so for me, in my business, in my career in the Marine Corps, and it wasn't always that way in the Marine Corps, but definitely in my last tour on active duty in the Marine Corps, I was a lot more about my faith. And so for me, that's part of being, a man. It's like, or a woman, if you're a woman, illuminate your faith, out with it. Be bold about it, man. Don't be apologetic about it. We're not here to apologize. We're here to help people and serve.
I've talked about this with some of my friends, is that when you have the truth, you don't have to worry about what other people think or say. And by the truth, it's not my opinion. It's just God's word. And when you're standing on that, I don't have to be necessarily aggressive or harsh or
Yeah.
a jerk. Telling someone the truth is not a good excuse to be a jerk to them.
Yeah.
But I also don't have to be like you're saying, I don't have to be apologetic about it. I don't have to apologize for sharing the truth. I wouldn't apologize if I was to tell you, hey, you have a terminal disease
Yeah.
and I have the cure. I wouldn't apologize for telling you have a terminal disease, no matter how upset you were.
Yeah. Or that you got the cure.
Yeah, I was like, hey, I have the cure, and you're really upset that this other thing isn't going to be the cure. I'm not.
Yeah, man.
I'm just telling you the truth. I don't have to yell at you or get angry at you or whatever. But I'm also not going to be ashamed or feel some sort of way for telling you, that you're wrong about this other idea you have.
Yeah, and I love that too, man, because I'm excited about the content that we're going to bring, on this channel. The content about, just being bold, man, and like you said, being unapologetic about that, because we're here for a reason, we're here for a purpose, and we're supposed to serve other people. But how can you serve other people if you can't lead, from the front? Even in your faith, lead from the front. Don't be half-hearted about it. It says in God's word about, you're either on or you're off. You're either hot or you're cold, but there's no in between.
Right.
And I think that's kind of critical. So I know we'll talk about that a lot more, in future, podcasts. But, I think it's important for people to know that, it's really about leadership and how you post your posture, I guess, if you will, So lots of cool stuff.
Well, we didn't get very far into your Marine career. Like, we were going to hopefully get through all of it, but I think we might have to do another episode on it just to kind of finish it up. That way, we give it enough time, but not too much time. We got a lot more into some, I think, even more important stuff, talking about faith and how we can apply that. Unless you feel like there's not much more to tell about your Marine Corps career.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff to share, but I don't think we can do it in in an episode or two. But I think maybe it's something we could talk about kind of along the way.
Yeah, maybe we'll just get into it in more episodes. So we'll stick with the plan. Next week we'll talk about out of the Marine Corps. We'll talk about your transition out and kind of what you did right after, and then into what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Or maybe we'll do what you're doing now in another episode, but we'll start getting into what you did after the Marines. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah.
This is really fast. I feel like it went really, really quick.
Yeah, man.
Thanks y'all for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Give us a rating on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you want to reach out, we'd love to hear from you guys. Throw a comment down there under the YouTube video, and we'll try to get back to you or answer your questions. If you like this video, obviously give it a like. If you didn't, let us know how we could do better or what you'd love to see on this podcast. We'd love to hear from you guys. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next week on the Secure the Perimeter podcast. See ya.